Good afternoon, class. We're going to revisit graphing today, but we're going to be graphing inequalities. So this would be using the greater than or less than symbol and greater than and less than equal to symbol. So a linear inequality just describes a region rather than just a line to satisfy sometimes a word problem or just an equation. So here we have two examples of inequalities that have been graphed already. We'll do some examples and some setup for you. But the first one that we're going to talk about over here, this one here, we have y greater than x plus 1. You'll notice that there's a dashed line, meaning that's not solid. This dashed line right here is because the inequality, look here, the inequality does not have a line underneath it to depict equal to. Now look at the second one over here. So graph 2 over here. I'll change these to 1s and 2s if that helps. Now look at this line. This is a solid line. This one was a dashed line. A solid line. Look at the inequality. There's a line underneath it. So if there's a line underneath your inequality, you're going to be graphing a dashed line. Or excuse me, a solid line. And then if there's no line underneath it, you're going to do a dashed line. So now you notice that there's two parts that are shaded. The pink part here, this whole shaded region here, this is the shaded region. That's going to be the points or numbers that satisfy the given inequality. So this is all shaded here. That's what you're going to be doing in your assignment or after the notes. So I'll go through some examples and what we expect you to do. Here is inequality. We're going to graph y greater than negative 2x plus 1. And to do that, we want to first graph the line. So we're going to graph the line y equals negative 2x plus 1. So that's the first thing we have to do. Now, reviewing what we did in the last chapter, we start at 1 on the y-intercept, put a dot, and then we write the slope as negative 2 over 1. So that's going to be down 2. So down 1, 2, and to the right 1. And we're going to draw a line going through that point. Now, remember, because our inequality had no line underneath it, I'm going to do a dashed line. So that's what it means to be a dashed line, and that is because our original inequality up here does not have a line underneath it, so we do it dashed. Now we have to determine where we're going to shade. To shade, we're going to look at our inequality, y greater than negative 2x plus 1. And we want numbers for y here, we want numbers for y to be larger than the line. That's what this inequality is saying by saying that y is greater than. So larger than the line would be above it. So all of these numbers up here above the line is where we would shade. So that's what you're going to do in your assignment is you're going to be determining what numbers satisfy the inequality. So there's what an inequality would look like for y greater than negative 2x plus 1. So here are the instructions that you should write down. This is what we just did, graphing inequalities. And there's two different forms, one less than and one greater than. But we want to have all of our equations in mx plus b form. So the first step, graph y equals mx plus b. And it's going to be a dashed line if there's no line underneath your inequality. So this right here is telling us dashed line for the two inequalities that do not have lines underneath them. You do a solid line when you have a line underneath your inequality. So this one should have been the other way. I apologize. Should be less than or equal to. And then now we determine we're going to shade below the line. Anytime your inequality is less than, this means smaller than, we're going to shade below the line. and you shade above the line if you have a greater than symbol. That means we want everything to be larger than the line. So those are the instructions. You can pause this if you didn't get a chance to write it down and come back to it. But we're going to do two more examples. The first example here is an equation that is not written y equals mx plus b. So the first thing you're going to have to do is get this in that form. So you're going to have to remember, how do we get rid of numbers and move them to the other side? Well, the first thing you're going to have to do is subtract 4x from both sides so that we can get y by itself. 6 minus 4x can be rewritten as negative 4x plus 6. And then the last step would be to divide by negative 3. Now we're going to have to review something here, and it's probably something that you don't remember, but from the first term in chapters 1 through 5, we talked about solving inequalities. I believe it was chapter 3. When you divide by a negative number, so here we're dividing by a negative 3, you have to flip your inequality. So it won't be greater than or equal to. Now it's going to be less than or equal to. So we flipped our inequality. Okay, so the first step in this problem, because this inequality was in standard form, we wanted to rewrite it so that it was in y equals mx plus b. So now that we have it in y equals mx plus b, we can now graph it. So I have, here is our graph. So the first thing you have to do is start at negative 2 on the y-axis. So we put a dot there. We have a slope of 4/3. And again, we've talked a lot about this. A lot of you guys like to divide negative 4 by negative 3 and get a decimal. Notice that I left it as a fraction, 4/3. Leave it as a fraction. It'll be easier to graph. So we go up 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and over 3. 1, 2, 3. And we have a solid line because our inequality has a line underneath it. We do a solid line. And now because our inequality is less than, we're going to shade below, and you'll notice that this one is shaded below. So there's your example of how to shade an inequality. And then what I'm going to have you do is there are two lines here. And what I want you to do is graph these two lines. There's two separate lines. One of them is already written, y equal or y less than negative x plus 3. You can interpret that to be negative 1x plus 3. That will help you with your slope. But notice this one is in standard form. So for your notes, I want you to rewrite that one in y equals mx plus b. So graph both and bring them to class. And if you don't quite understand the shading part, that can be the very first thing we talk about in class is how to shade it. But you should be able to graph both lines. So rewrite the second one in slope-intercept form. So y equals mx plus b. Graph the first one, put them both on the same coordinate plane, and bring those to class.